Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Madfig Customs. Today, I will be making yet another Maddie Franklin costume, just because there's so many, and I've gotten into Jesus. I've gotten into the run from 24 years ago, and I'm just really enjoying it. It's just refreshing to read something ironically that old, but it's just such a cool character, and I don't know. I love the fact that they design different costumes for her each time. Today, specifically, I'll be focusing on one of the costumes, which I believe is from the 5th comic, and this is one where her and Jessica Drew face off against these kind of weird hentai aliens, but nothing gets too dark there. Not much more to say about a recap here. I think I covered in the last episode. Maddie's just still a cool character, still getting into a lot of cool adventures with her friends, and yeah, pretty much just enjoying being a superhero, which you don't see very often, especially in the Spider-Man runs. It's always dark drama. It's usually someone lost their entire family to a crazy billionaire or something, and then they have to become supremely responsible with the supreme powers and all these things. But Maddie, she does not. She's not super responsible. She's mature. Okay, so we'll be starting off with a rogue action figure again, because that's a perfect body type, as well as a Hydra female officer, just for the head. Again, we're going to go through what we did last time, just a little bit quicker. We're going to heat this figure up. Make sure you get all the joints and everything. Easiest thing to take off is the head. And then you follow that up with the arms, the shoulders, and pretty much everything else like the legs. Those pop off really easily. It's just perfect for that. Okay, so now we got it completely popped off. And from the female Hydra agent, we've taken an arm, and now we're taking her head. Sadly, she's become fully fodder for this. Also, another thing I'm using is the Miles Morales. I have just a ton of Spider-Man fodder, and so I don't feel so bad. I'm going to use his eyes. I will be cutting them out, as brutal as that sounds, and using them for Maddie's lenses. If you do this, be very careful, because you'll be using an X-Acto knife, and they're typically very sharp, and so you don't want to cut yourself up making an action figure, because how do you explain that at the clinic? They don't take you seriously. They send you home. You bleed out. You die. It's a whole thing. So you're going to cut out the eyes, just like I'm doing here. And you don't want to cut You do, yes, because you want them to be thin, but if you cut too shallow, you risk damaging the lens. So I got those off, and now I'll be using my faithful Artuguna markers to paint this action figure. To paint this figure. And yeah, I was going to go down the line. Her costume is predominantly black, so the torso, there really isn't that many highlights to it. Eventually down the line there will be, but we're just going to cover it in black and make it look nice. Right now it's shiny. We're going to make it matte a little later, just to give it that professional action figure look. We're going to use our stand and alligator clips just to stand this up for now, because most of the parts you paint, you do not want to lay them down, because you could interfere with the paint if it's still wet, so you got to dry them that way. Next up, we'll be doing the arms. Now, her arms are black and red. Mostly, the red is in the middle. For the arm to hold it, I'm using toothpicks. You can basically use those as shims and keep fitting them in the hole until it gets tight. And then you'll be able to hold your action figure arm. And then put the alligator clip on there. That way it kind of keeps the shims pushing outwards, makes a tighter hole. And then you'll be painting pretty much the entire thing. I painted red because the highlights are black, and that's pretty much easy to cover the red color. So we're going to do a lot of red like we did last time. I believe our figure had some red on it. It was also the rogue body. We're going to want to cover that green, so I'm going to use several coats. For the leg, it's a little bit less of a surface area here, and I don't want to waste too much of my pen's ink. I'm just going to do between the calf and the thigh, because that's where the red is going to be mostly. And again, I'm going to get the joints, get in the little crevices, and make sure you just line it out. I go over just a little bit more where the red is supposed to be, because we're going to start using our painter's tape, which will cover the red, but we still want a little bit of red dipping into the place that we're gonna be painting, just so we can get the very nice line going. Here I'm using thinner painter's tape, covering the legs with that, and getting a couple of layers on there because you don't want it to bleed under the tape. I'm going to be using the butt end of my tweezers, and I'm going to be tamping down the edge of the tape there, so we get even less leadage, because we don't want that. especially since we're going to be painting black now. And if that bleeds, you're going to end up using more ink if you have to cover that with another color that's lighter. And most colors are lighter than black, except for Vanta Black, which is the blackest black, but it's still black. I don't think there is Vanta Black for paint acrylic markers yet. Maybe one day. And so yeah, we're going to do the same thing for the arm. We're going to cover the bits here that we know are not going to get painted. We're going to tamp those down, make sure it's real tight, just because, again, bleeding, we do not want the black to bleed into the red. That sounds like a weird MK Ultra activation code. Black bleeding into red. Okay, so here, doing the torso, same thing. Put down the painter's tape, did a couple of layers there. It was very straightforward because the painting job is just a couple of angles. You'll see it's a lozenge on the neck there. Started painting the arms. Now get that black in there. I hold it because it's dry with my fingers here, but theoretically you should be using toothpicks, just because if the paint isn't quite dry yet and you touch it, you're going to get your fingerprint indentation in the wet paint, and that's going to dry, and it's just going to look like a weird kindergarten clay model, and you don't want that. Using your alligator clips, you will put that on here to your toothpicks, and then here I'm putting in a second layer over the skin color and I believe the green or the black that used to be there. So you're going to need a couple of layers for the red. Putting my alligator clips back on, because once we put that on our little stand and we start spraying, we want to make sure it's solid. Speaking of spray, we're going to get out our matte Krylon finish. Spray a little bit out of the can first, because you don't want to get the head of it. It's like pouring a beer. You don't want too much head. You don't want too much head. So now you start spraying here on the parts. Make sure the paint is sealed. Okay, so we're moving on to the Hydra female officer head. I have cut out her eyes, obviously, because she's missing her eyes. I've already cut them out because we're going to be putting lenses over that, and her eyes were like already bulbous with her own lenses, and we don't want that bulbousness. So same thing, I just took an X-Acto, popped those bad boys out. I'm just going to paint this, cover it in red. We're going to do a couple layers here. I'm keeping in with the line of the mask. I didn't put any painter's tape just yet, didn't need it. And then I'm just doing a second coat here, making sure we cover all the darker parts, the streaky parts. We definitely don't want the streaky parts. And there we go. That's done. Get our torso out. Look at that crisp line. Crisp line. Love it. I don't know how they do it down at Hasbro. I'm sure they got robots and computers, but we're just using painter's tape and markers. We do our best. Here's the leg. I'm going to take off the paint. I'm going to take off the painter's tape live just so we can see what that looks like. Look at that line. So straight. Oh, it's mostly straight. And if it's not, you can always cover that up with your markers. Going to remove this part here. There you go. And if you look at her costume, she's got that like red knee area that bleeds into the calf and the thigh. Here's the arm. Going to take that off. Like that line. Very crisp, like that upper line. Very nice. And it's dry. So we sprayed it. We sprayed the red parts. You're going to want to spray the black parts. Spray the black parts just to make sure that they're covered too. I don't think I showed this in the video, but everything here is sprayed to within an inch of its life just to make sure that the paint does not come off on your fingertips, because you will be handling it again. You will start to heat up your limbs, and once you heat them up, you do not want that paint to get all tacky again. Thus the importance of sealer. Is sealer the right word? Primer? No, sealer. Whatever. Who cares? Now we're going to heat up the joints, and we're going to pop those in. I usually heat up only the holes. You don't really need to heat up the joints, like the little peg joint, because that plastic's pretty solid. Just heat up the holes, and you pop those joints in. There you go. And we got a little shoulder action going there. Now she's still missing a couple limbs, but what we're going to do is same process. Heat her up, heat her up. This, we're going to do a twofer because we're lazy today. The legs, strangely enough, they pop off very easily. Pop off easy and pop on easy, but they're still quite solid. Hasbro's really stepped up their joint game. Okay, here we go. We got our legs. You can see the knee still has some green to it, but we're going to cover that up. I believe the knee and elbow joints on the surface are not the same kind of plastic. I read this technical sheet with the plastics they use. I don't quite understand it, but the paint doesn't stick quite as well to the knees for whatever reason. It's not impossible. It's just you need to do extra work. Okay, here. We're going to pop on the eyes. We're going to get our crazy glue out. We're going to be very careful because we do not want to glue this on the wrong way. We do not want to get this on our fingers. So we're going to use our 2 pincers here. Tamp it down. Use your pincers. Pincers are a lot easier to take off if they have glue on them than fingers. I've ruined many a figure trying to glue a tiny detail onto it and then just ripping off all the paint because the glue came off. The glue took it off on my hands or whatever. So yeah, we're just going to pop those eyes on. I like the positioning there. If you're doing this studio. Okay, here's our Icarus figure. We're going to be using, guess if you can guess what we're using, we're going to be using his ears. Now, the Icarus figure, you can tell he's been blinded. I took his energy eyes out. I'm not a huge fan of the Eternals, the movie. So any figure that has come across my desk has been immediately thrown into the fodder pile. And this is uncommon. I don't usually cut ears out, but for whatever reason, this costume had ears on it. So it's just like, you know what? I'm going to cut off some random useless figure's ears, Icarus. I'm going to use them. And something that I discovered is that the female ears and the male ears on the toys, on the action figures, are all the same size. It doesn't matter if you're using a guy's ears or a girl's ears. What matters is the skin tone and this mesh print. Okay. So now I've laid down some painter's tape on the legs, on the arms, because there are some highlights and some details here on the costume. They're all straight lines. So I used very thin painter's tape because I didn't want to go just with my hands. I wanted a guide. So I used this very thin painter's tape. I used my marker and I painted these areas here, made sure they didn't bleed. But yeah, these sort of half diamond areas are her costume. I believe she has 2 on the back of the limbs as well, but I'm not doing those because I don't want to. I'm just going to stick with these ones for now. Going to get our tweezers out. We're going to start pulling off the very thin tape there. Make sure it doesn't smudge. I like these lines. They're pretty good. They look nice. And if they don't, this is something you can go over with your marker again and get a straighter line. But I like these. I'm happy with these. It's looking good. Getting rid of that tape. So far, so good. Now I'm going to take my marker here. I'm going to go over the knee. I don't know. It depends on who you ask. I don't think you can have too many layers of sealer unless clearly you've caked it in sealer and it looks like a glazed donut. I don't think you can have too much because it's a good protection. And I always lightly spray it. So I painted a little bit. I resprayed it just to make sure it's a little bit more solid. And here we go. Now you get that matte finish there. I'm happy with it. I think it's pretty true to the comics. I like this costume. It's very luchador. Good positions here. You can see the paint. Really good coverage, and that's what we want. We want to get everything. We want all the joints and all that. Thank you for listening. This was another MadFig Customs video. You would know that if you clicked on it. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope there will be more. Thank you very much. Oh, hit subscribe. Just do it. Just hit subscribe. And thanks.